Sorry. Oh, I should button.
Good morning. Welcome to the Selectmen's Meeting for March 9th, and it's 9 a.m. We're in the Selectmen's Chambers. Roll call, please.
Ken Miller present.
Sulicio's present. Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have no additions or deletions, and this is a session to review the budget and have discussion that anyone would like to have about that. And we'll take it broadly, too, because
Absolutely.
budget always encompasses goals, too. So, Jim, do you want to get started with what we're looking at? There are copies of the budget here, if anybody, at least the version that we're all working off of for now. How are you, Ann? I'm good. How are you? Good, thank you.
So what you should have in front of you, if you took a copy, is a copy of the town budget, operating budget, version 20. If you look in the very bottom left-hand corner, you'll see a V20. The one that's on my computer just outside the door over there is actually version 27 already. So there have been a number of changes that have been made to this document already, but because this is the one that members of the board and the finance committee have been utilizing to do the bulk of their work, I wanted to print this one so everybody's on the same page, but I'd be happy to forward off to anybody that would like a copy of the more updated one. Just let me know at the end of the meeting.
And Jim, question?
Yes.
I wrote down some questions that I had.
Yep.
One, is there an electronic version available?
There is. I'd be happy to email it or give a hard copy to anybody that would like it.
Okay.
And what you're seeing is actually, which you can probably note by the fact that on the far right-hand bottom corner it says page 42. This is just a segment of the overall budget document. So also included in the total budget book that you'll remember from town meeting would be the revenue projections, the expenditure projections, all of the water budget, the enterprise fund, detail, the debt detail, benefits. There's a whole host of other segments, but for the purpose of this discussion, we're looking just at the budget. If anybody that's here, anybody that's watching, has an interest in looking beyond this document into some of the other segments of the budget, I'd be happy to meet with you, speak with you over the phone, go have a cup of coffee someplace, whatever works for you. So just let me know. I'm here 5 days a week and lately on Saturdays too, so we'll make some time available for whatever works out for you. So what you're looking at in this document is, starting from the left-hand side, line numbers. Actually, it's a new edition this year that makes it a little easier for us to be able to flip from page to page and ask questions about specific line items. The account name, the fiscal year 17, where we finished in that account, 18, where we finished, 19, as has been approved, which is the year that we're currently just a little more than halfway through, coming on 3/4 through, and the fiscal 20 requested by the department, and then the fiscal 20 TA recommended. By and large, those will be identical. There are a couple of exceptions where I will have made a recommendation that deviates from the original request, and there'll be a note explaining why. You'll then see a dollar variance, and that dollar variance is keyed to the TA recommended against the 19 approved. And then the percentage variance, also keyed to those same two columns. On the far right, you'll have a column for notes, so if there's anything of particular interest or change, there'd be a note there. So this is an all boards and committees meeting, so I know that the Board of Selectmen has already spent time with the document, so without hearing any objection, we move beyond the Board of Selectmen. FinCom has spent time with all of this, so moving beyond FinCom as a board. The next board that we would see would be Board of Assessors, which begins on the very next page on line 52. Anybody from the Board of Assessors with us today? Madam Chair, how do you want to proceed? You want to just hit the
Well, I
boards
think-
of folks that are here, or?
I think the purpose of the meeting, too, is to make sure that we're all on the same page. So you've got the notes in these sections. Each department or board, I think, deserves a little bit of a,
Absolutely.
an overview.
Sure.
Whether or not they're here.
Okay.
Just in the spirit of communication across the
Absolutely.
town.
Can I add one thing?
Yes, please.
I'd also like to have a discussion on how we present this, because the last 2 or 3 or 5 town meetings, when we present the packet to the town meeting, there's been a source of confusion as to what document we're going off of, what's being shown on the screen, what's being the handout.
Yep.
So I'd like to at least get that kind of roughed out so we can, for our mock
Yeah,
town
absolutely.
meeting,
No,
be prepared for that.
And it's good. I mean, on that point, what we've seen, that son of a-
I know it is.
what we've seen in the last couple of years that I've been around is having gone from a document that has salary and expense by department, and then the total of salary and expense by department, and then people wanting more information. Last year, we actually, in the packet, had this entire document, which is the line-by-line expense, in addition to the salary and expense total, and that's what caused, I think, a lot of the confusion, because some people were working off of the more detailed version that they liked. Others were 10 pages earlier in the budget book, working off the salary and the expense. So we need to figure out how to give everybody that wants either just that limited view or the more expanded view the information, but make it clear which one we're actually functioning off of for the purpose of the discussion on the floor.
Yeah, that's what I want to get to. So.
And like Wayne mentioned real quickly just now, was the mock town meeting, if you will. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Certainly. For the first time this year, we're going to try to have a mock town meeting, which is going to be very informal. It's not going to be in the Great Hall, Memorial Hall. It's going to be in here. And it'll be once the warrant has been finalized and posted, sitting and going through, ideally, and I've not yet spoken to the moderator. He's expected to be here in a little bit today. But to actually sit with the moderator and go through the warrant piece by piece as though we were having the town meeting, and invite questions. So people will have had the opportunity to ask questions that they might have or hear explanations to items that are going to be on the warrant prior to being on the floor of town meeting, when it can get a little hectic and sometimes, honestly, a little intimidating when you're a citizen that doesn't necessarily participate in this stuff every day like some of us might. Just a little kind of a more toned down opportunity to ask questions about the warrant. So not certain how it'll go, given that it's the first one we're going to try, but I've done it in other communities, and it seems to work out nicely because people can feel a little bit more comfortable in asking their questions. Right now, we had that, I don't have the, was it the 30th?
The week before, yeah.
The 30th, right? Yeah, so the 30th of April. So I guess to Sue's point about taking big picture here, I guess before even going into detail on actual budgets, this version of the document, we were still close to $500,000 out of balance. A lot of things have happened since then. We've done a great deal of work with the school department, the school district, and they've been, I think, appropriately aware of our concerns, and we've not yet had a final vote of a reduced assessment, but we're expecting that we're going to see a significantly reduced assessment being asked. The original ask was for an increase of $1.1 million over last year, which is more than double the amount that we can raise in new taxes in a year. So obviously that wasn't sustainable. I think
What percentage was that? I don't remember.
9.5 or 9.6% increase.
I rounded it in my head to 10, but close.
We had the joint meeting last week. Selectman Licio and Miller and Finance Committee Member Shaka spoke, and I think did the town well by making the point that we want to be supportive. Everybody values education, but that is just one part, albeit it's a big part of the fiscal picture for the town, but it is just one part, and we need to be cognizant of all the other pieces that need to be able to be funded to provide the service that people are expecting. So,
I mean, basically, we just push the fact that this is not sustainable. To continue to ask for increases like that is not sustainable, given the fact that we can only go up 2.5%, 3%, depending on growth. So you can't keep going the same way and doing the same things if that's the case.
and the way the funding for the district works is if 2 of the 3 communities don't support the assessment, it goes back for reconsideration with the school committee. And as it stood last week, it was both Pepperell and Townsend speaking in opposition to the original assessment. Ashby wasn't there in terms of the select board or administrator, but obviously their reps on the school committee were there. So the short story is we expect that there's going to be a revised assessment coming back within the week.
And our decision on that, on what you would be putting in the TA recommended amount?
Was roughly $500,000 was what had been originally plugged in, which is just under 5%, 4.9% or so. And that's what, there's a little bit more than that that's in this version here, but the one that's on my screen is back down to a flat $500,000, which again is an increase that is still just about what we can raise. We can raise $445,000 in new taxes under Prop 2.5, so nearly the entirety of that, $500,000 of the 545 would be going to education.
I personally want to hold the line on that. Okay?
Yeah, when you get to the school department budget in this document, there is a note that says hard line, and that's because that was what was clearly stated by the board as we've been going through this process.
Well, I think everybody's with you on that. I don't think anybody has an appetite for an override.
No, but I just want it known that that's the amount that will be in that recommended
And
slot, so.
to be clear with the message we had to the school committee was that they need to take a different look at how they're doing things and planning, because they're operating what I consider as a bubble and not reality. That it was very clear that Pepperell and Townsend, as Jim said, Ashby wasn't there, but it was clear that the amount of money we can raise and the amount of money they continually ask for is not sustainable. In 3 to 4 years, it's going to get really ugly pretty quickly, I think. So you got to challenge them to do things differently.
And on that point, while we're talking about the operating assessment and the original request for $1.1 million, that's on top of an increase in next year's budget for the debt of $365,000. Now, that was all debt excluded, so that was for the school. But again, that's real money that's coming from the towns. So again, that's kind of one of the big drivers in the original version of the budget was that line. Again, from the 10,000-foot view, what you'll see in the notes in this version will be the phrase step and COLA. What that refers to is an employee position receiving a step increase in our pay matrix. So to give a brief description of that, several years ago, the town had a consultant come in and evaluate all of the positions in the organization and rate them based on their level of responsibility, from someone that may be a part-time door greeter all the way to the chief of police, and then everything between in terms of levels of responsibility, access to confidential information, interactions with others, ability to get the town in trouble if you make a mistake, those types of things. And every position was then placed in a grade based on their responsibility, and each grade had a series of steps going out horizontally that began with the minimum appropriate rate of pay and ended with the maximum appropriate rate of pay, with increments of 2.5% between the steps. So ostensibly, you would hire somebody, and there was flexibility to bring them into the organization between the first and third step, depending on what they brought to the table. And then each year, If they successfully completed a year and received a positive evaluation, they'd be allowed to move a step, 2.5%. That was all done before the town became nearly entirely a unionized organization. So what the personnel policies that were adopted by the town state in terms of that wage and classification plan that I just described is that it applies to everybody that's not in a union or in a personal services contract. So technically, there are, I think, four positions?
Or less, yeah.
You know, a small handful of positions that are not unionized or under a personal services contract that are still held to the hard line of that policy. All the other employees are not. Having said that, that doesn't mean that we're still not using that tool. While we're not required to, and they can't be compelled to stay within it, it's all subject to negotiation by the select board, we still are roughly using that document. So you'll find employee groups that have ranges of pay that tie back to those ranges of pay. So their contract may refer back to the comp and class plan. So toward that point, when you see COLA and STEP in the notes, the far right column, that is at this portion, at this time, this version of the budget, just to get the outside of the envelope for what a COLA and a STEP would look like, I had put in a 2% COLA, so that would take the entire grid of salaries and grow it by a COLA of 2%. So every number would change by 2%. And then each incumbent in this budget, in a position, it was contemplated would be moving a step if they had one available to them. So if they weren't at the top step already, I put in a 2.5% step. Again, not expecting that's where we would end up, but just wanting to see what that outside of the envelope would look like. The version that's on my computer across the hall no longer has COLA and STEP. It has currently just STEP built in. That's still subject to change with discussions with the select board. It may be that the board would rather see just a COLA and not steps. Regardless of how that decision is made by the board, ultimately it's all subject to negotiation. Every union contract is open. Starting this month, next month, we should be at the table with each group. So even if something is budgeted in this budget and passes town meeting and looks like an increase for an employee, it'll sit in that line unless and until a contract is negotiated and ratified by the union, approved by the select board, and signed. So even if town meeting passes these increases in salary, people don't get them unless a contract is negotiated and provides for it. This begs the other question, which has been a policy decision by the board. When I first got here, we did it a little differently. We took a reserve for salary adjustments and placed it in a standalone article. It was referred to as the bucket. You can still do that. I see Linda smirk right there. I remember talking with Linda about this. We're not doing that this year. This year, the decision, at least to this point, is to actually bake them into each line where they would otherwise be applied if a contract got negotiated. So,
I mean, it still leaves it a little bit loosey-goosey because, I mean, the reality is you are in contract negotiations. The concept of putting it in a separate account, kind of, it's thought to sometimes give management a little bit more flexibility when you're going into the negotiations. But in total, that would be all that you have. So it's 6 of this and half a dozen of the other. But for transparency's sake, just to let you know that's at this point where we're thinking.
and quite honestly, strategically, from a bargaining perspective, and this is something that has just been cooking around in my head in the last couple of days, is it actually is a little bit of a management tool to be able to say that this is what's there, and it's not only you, it's the next person and the next officer and the next building over. If you look at the budget, it's as clear as can be. It's not this amorphous, number of dollars in this bucket that maybe if you're more aggressive, you get a bigger bite out of.
Yeah.
Everybody's-
And all our employees know how that all works, so. But at least you can see that that's what's going up, and everything else is pretty much, if there's an increase, it's a reasonable one.
So you want me to just hit each board, Sue?
Yeah, I think. Wayne, do you think so?
Yep.
All right, so if you then go to page 43, the very top of the page, Board of Assessors. This is a good example where you'll see... Does everybody have a copy that wants one? Would you like a copy of it?
If I want one, I'll get one.
Okay, all right. The very first line, line 52, on that page, shows the impact of somebody that even if everyone else was getting a COLA and a step, would only be getting a COLA because that employee is at the maximum step. So that goes to some of the equity issues of whether you use a COLA or a step. If you did a COLA, then the whole grid gets increased, and everybody, even if they're at the top step, will see some increase. If you do just steps, if you're already at the max step, you're going to stay where you were the year before. If you look a couple lines down, line 54, there's a COLA and a correct step being contemplated there. The position had been created the year before. It was a combination of 2 part-time positions, and there was an earlier grid that had been being relied on when they plugged the person into that position. So this corrects the step. So even if the COLA is removed, there still will be something slightly different than a 2.5% step because there was a change in the actual step that the person should have been in.
And sometimes that's, if a job description were to get rewritten, sometimes it gets leveled at a different place too. So you may have had one level before, you rewrite the job description, add responsibility, the job is, quote, worth more.
Right. That's a great example to bring up now, I guess, at the 10,000 foot view, because there are a couple of positions in this draft budget that that will be impacted by that process. We have the Cemetery and Parks Superintendent sitting right there, and he's one of the examples where his elected board determined that his job description was no longer accurate. Correct me where I step aside, stray, Roger. They said that this might have been what your job looked like at one point in time, but it's no longer accurate. You do these other things that we judge don't add just more work, because if it's just more work, but it's the same type of work, you don't change. You stay in that grade because you haven't become more responsible. But if it's rewritten and adds things that are more responsible in nature, you go through a process, the policy calls it out, the job description is submitted by the department head, reviewed by the TA, ultimately rated and brought to the select board, and the select board will determine whether or not they find that it's justified to reclassify it to a higher grade. Yes, Andrew?
I was wondering if it was equitable to give some people a raise on a new job description and some not, because there must be others whose job descriptions are going to be written and they're not getting any advantage to it.
It's an excellent point,
Yeah.
and it's incumbent, for the policy, it's incumbent upon the department supervisor to work, to start the process. So if I'm an employee in this part of the organization, and I believe day to day that I'm no longer just processing these papers, but I'm taking cash over the counter and, responsible. I would go to my supervisor and say, I think my job description has changed, and I'd really like to sit and talk with you about it. There's a form you go through. You do a desk audit with your supervisor, and you put all the things in there. And if it looks different and like there's more responsibility, the department supervisor then would bring it to the TA. The TA would say, okay, let's rate it against the tool. It's a very formulaic thing. There's not a lot of room for wiggling. It's, you look and say, how many years of education is required? If it's, 7 to 10, there's a thing that says 7 to 10 years, you get this many points. You tally up the points, and it tells you at the end of the evaluation whether you should be still in that grade or move to a more responsible grade. So if there are people out there that believe that they're functioning in a job description that no longer is reflective of their responsibility, it's incumbent upon them to bring it to their supervisor, and the supervisor, to the extent that they agree, to bring it to me, and then I bring it through to the board. So we have a couple of those that are being done this year.
And it's the only way that you can keep up with the changes. Instead of, what's unusual would be to have, or what should be unusual, is to have a job description that was created 15 years ago and still working off the same job description, because I don't think anything in town has stayed that stagnant. But
I agree, but that wasn't my point. My point was, I thought,
Sorry.
shouldn't you wait to give raises on new job descriptions until everybody has the opportunity? It seems unfair to give some a raise in 1 year and others not. Now, when you explain that it's up to the supervisor to know, then that leaves the brunt of that problem with them, and that I can buy.
That's exactly what it
Because
is.
they're the closest to the work.
Right.
So, to your point, Andrew, I think some number of years, it's good to refresh the entire system. And the town did that in November of 15. So, 3.5 years ago, the town had a consultant come in, review all the job descriptions, review them with the department managers, determine whether they're still accurate. If there was a handful, and there were, that they determined were no longer reflective of the actual tasks that the people were doing, they pulled them aside and then they re-rated them. Several were rated to be adjusted to a higher grade. So,
Were any adjusted lower?
to my knowledge, no.
Okay.
No.
Just curious.
Yeah, and I can't imagine, well, I guess I could, use the office that I work in. You can imagine that if the position of executive assistant was downgraded to be an administrative assistant, and some of the more responsible things regarding insurances and Corey were moved off of that position to some other place. Conceivably, that position would then be evaluated and downgraded.
Is there any check to see that the person is actually doing things in the new job description, or is that left to the supervisor as well?
I think
That's the
First-
job of a department.
Yeah, first line, it is with the supervisor, and they're the ones, again, that are closest to the work on a day-to-day basis. But if you've got, if you've got a board or commission that are, interacting with an employee, they would have a piece of that as well. They might see that certain things that a job description says, or the expectation would suggest should be being done, aren't being done, so they would have a piece. But then you'd have a TA as well that should be looking across the organization and determining whether or not on any given, year, things are as they should be.
Well, and
So
then
there-
certain failures pop up with the accountant and the treasurer as well.
Sure, yeah. And they're going to be, again, there are a couple in here that are indicative of that. So again, to pick on Roger because he showed up.
Yeah.
Roger's board, elected board that worked closely with him, made that call. So the policy is working in as much as it's begun. It's not yet finished, but his job description has been revised. It's now sitting with me. We'll go through the reclass process, and then it goes to the select board.
I wasn't questioning Rogers.
Oh, no, I'm just using him as an
Yeah.
example to show that the system is working
I was just
mid-cycle.
unaware of the process.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions about how that process works? It's meant to equalize things and to depoliticize things, really?
Yeah, I mean, it really leaves it up to the department head or the board
Right.
in that kind of a case, but, it's incumbent upon everyone, the individual that's doing the job, if they keep taking on more responsibility, but aren't addressing it with their superior, it's kind of like, you gotta be able to say, listen, my job's changed, I wasn't doing this 3 years ago when I started. And it's incumbent on to go the other way as well for the department head or the board to say, okay, that worked then, but look at all these new regulations that have come down that they're having to handle now that they didn't have to handle 3 years ago. So it's to constantly keep things up to date and fair.
Right. And the tricky thing from an employee's perspective that I've seen most often is just because the workload increases, sometimes an employee will think, "Yeah, I really should be reclassified and get more money because look at all the additional things that I'm doing." But if your gig is to be here for 35 hours and you used to do 12 things, but now you do 15 things, but they're all the same type of things in terms of level of responsibility, we need you to be more efficient and try to get those things done But it's not going to require that you be raised to a different grade in the grid because you're doing the same responsibility. That make sense?
Excuse me, Jim?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Would you be able to turn down that Venetian blind in back of you? Reflection from the snow from the roof is a bit of a problem.
Easier said than done. How about, should we put in the,
I put new blinds in the budget.
yeah, I was just gonna say that.
And chairs.
Facilities.
Is that better?
A little bit, I'm still getting some stuff at the bottom, but I don't know if you can fix
Should I
that.
have Andrea sit there?
Well, whatever is convenient is okay with me, but I just want to make sure that you look the best you can. Thank you, Wayne. That's,
Can we get shades, please? I feel like I'm in Florida right now.
excellent. Thank you, Jim.
I feel like
Thank you,
having
Wayne.
a college market hit on the head with some blinds never quite came to themselves.
I know. Curtains touch the floor and blinds make it halfway.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We did last week.
that's right, we did.
Stuff it in there a little.
I just want to volunteer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne.
Did you take a Hail Mary already?
Hang on, Jerry.
That's much better. Thank you, Bob.
That's good for everybody.
All right. Other 10,000-foot view things, Sue, you think of, Wayne?
No, the only thing that I think significantly changed was from Tuesday night, the fire chief adjusted the paramedic.
Yeah.
So it went from a net negative, or a gain for us, to a net zero for adding the 3 paramedics, because he didn't factor in the holiday pay.
Yeah, actually, he and I met yesterday, and it's gone a little bit less neutral.
Less neutral.
So just to give people a kind of a peek at the inside pool we're talking about, we currently operate as a combination department for the fire and EMS. So we have a chief and 3 union full-time employees, and then we fill all other shifts with per diems. Now, we are an ALS, Advanced Life Support Community, so we can provide on our ambulance the highest care, level of care, if you call. Part of the requirement to have that certification is that we provide that service 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. With a combination department, it's becoming more and more difficult to be able to fill those shifts with just 3 full-time employees and relying on per diems. The per diems are generally people that are paramedics working full-time elsewhere. Either we have some that work for Boston Med Flight, others that work for other ambulances in the area, and they're on our list, so on their days off, if we need a shift filled, we can call on them and they'll come fill in. So the chief, to his credit, in recognizing that we have an obligation to do 24/7 coverage, and that you no longer have the model that worked in days gone by with a combination department, was when you had generally people employed very locally, and if a call came, their employer would let them run and come serve in their call capacity and put out a fire or address an issue at another building across town, with the understanding that there, but for the grace of God, go I. It could be their building next week. So the other building across the town is going to let their people go and come help out. So you used to have much more of a tight-knit group of people that were working and volunteering. Now with people working further and further from home, further and further from the station, you don't have that same ability to have people volunteer and be able to respond. So over time, that model is fading and people are phasing it out. They've then gone from full volunteer to a combination department, which is what we've got. We now are at the point where the combination is still, it's functioning, but it's not functioning as well as it needs to, so he's looking to upgrade to additional full-time personnel.
And it's specifically for the paramedic piece of that?
Correct.
Okay, so it's it's a person who may be a firefighter, but at the same time, they're a paramedic. And it's to address this 24/7 requirement for the ALS. Okay?
Excellent.
And to their credit, also, they, it's a different way of looking at things, and they also got grants to send for firefighters to paramedic training school for free, basically.
It's roughly $14,000 a person to get the paramedic training. So we've had some folks that might just be basic EMT that, but for this grant, wouldn't be able to go and get that training. So, you know, the fire chief has sought the grants, the board has approved the grants, and then we now have people that are in the queue to become fully licensed paramedics. So
It's extremely competitive as well, so that if you're relying on too heavily, certainly on per diem, you could have a list of 20 people that are willing to fill in, but if all 20 of them say, no, I'm busy this weekend, you know, hopefully you can get somebody to fill in. You know, maybe somebody that's on our regular one would volunteer, but it leaves us in a tenuous place, and I would not want my family, you know, my friends, to be the one that there wasn't a paramedic on duty, you know, because that would mean firefighter who definitely has emergency training, they can't provide the same kind of care that a paramedic can. Think of it in terms of a somebody that does CPR and is trained on doing, you know, helping you if you're choking, things like that, but not able to give you medication, not able to start an IV line. Basically, a paramedic is like an emergency room RN or a little bit more. And they can help diagnose things as well. EMT is helpful, but that's just not going to get us there. And my fear in not doing this is somebody is going to be unlucky at some point. And I don't want that to happen to anybody in this community. So I am 150%, if that is a way that I can say it, in support of this change.
So to Wayne's point, from a budgetary impact, and if you want to follow along, it's page 48. And I know we're jumping around a little bit, but these are, I think, highlights of what things are different in this budget. If you get down to line 334 and 335, and you track all the way over to the right-hand side, you'll note that the line 333 is 3 new full-time firefighter paramedics at $172,000. So that, obviously, that's a significant amount of money. The very next line is the line where the per diem medics were being paid. There's a resulting decrease of $187,000. So what the chief is able to demonstrate is if I have this list of people that I'm paying and I have to pay very competitively to get them to come on their day off, I can bring 3 full-timers on at our contract rates of pay for less money than we're paying to have people on call that we hope will come. Now, the point that Wayne made additionally is that there is, in this version of the budget, there was another line that was implicated by making this change. So while this would look like a $17,000 net savings by doing this, there are a couple of line items further down in the budget that he had to add to. So as of Tuesday, it was roughly a net zero.
Because I think you have like a uniform allowance.
Right. Holiday. There's a holiday line too.
Yeah.
So at that point, it was a net zero, which is still a great thing. I mean, even if it was going to cost some money, it's still, from a policy perspective and a public service perspective, it's the right move to make. For complete transparency on this, what doesn't show in making this move by looking at his budget is the fact that 3 new full-time employees might take health insurance. So when you get back to the tail end of the budget where health insurance is budgeted, there is an amount of money being carried prospectively for 3 new firefighters to come on. If, worst case scenario, they take health insurance and they take family health insurance. Could be that they come on and they have health insurance from someone else, or they are single plan versus family, but
we have to
we have to account for the worst. So kind of jumped there a little bit.
As long as we're on the fire department, we have 3 positions that are getting a 36, 37, 42% raise.
That's correct.
I understand that's to make them competitive with neighboring towns.
Comparable towns versus neighboring, just a little bit of a distinction. I mean, you and I could be neighbors, and you're driving a Jaguar, and I'm driving a 72 Volkswagen Beetle. Just because we're neighbors doesn't make us economically comparable.
Right. Okay, so comparable towns. That's still a big increase in 1 year. And I was wondering if there was a way we can fill that in gradually.
I'll respond first.
Please.
This is something that was done at the collective bargaining table, and they were 2 years out. So it was on the contract that was being done. They were 2 years working off of an old contract. Their original proposal was, we have since 2 years ago been this far behind our comps, and we think from our perspective we should be getting this increase and retroactive to the prior 2 years. When the dust settled, there was a recognition based on the data that they are that far behind, but the board's position back was beginning next year, not going backwards. Going backwards, you get the same 2% that everybody else got, but going forward, we'll recognize the fact that the data bears this out. And the reason that this was a significant issue, and I won't speak for the board, but for me at the table, bringing my perspective to the board was, we spent 14 grand, whether it's grant money or whether it's departmental money, to train somebody. And if we're paying them 30% less than somebody in a nearby comparable community is paying,
Bye-bye.
we're just a feeder system. And we're finding that with, quite honestly, a number of positions in our organization.
This won't be the last one.
We don't want to be in the business of training for other communities.
Well,
Okay?
I'm not saying they're not worth it.
No, but that was part of the decision as well, okay? It's like, you need to think forward about it. Yeah, it's a significant percentage, but in terms of adding up those amounts, it's not a huge number compared to...
Percentage-wise, it looks large,
Yeah.
but it's only 60.
I mean, it's a percentage because it's a bump up in the pay scale.
But the short answer to that, Joe, is yes, that would have been great to bleed it over the next 3 years.
But we were already behind on the
The
contract
give
by
and
3.
Yeah, the give and take was they swallowed hard in not getting it for the prior 2, where they arguably could have and should have, and said, we'll take it prospectively.
That contract was out there for 2 years,
Yeah.
unchanged, so. You could say we already benefited financially from the last couple of years.
And this again ties back to a certain degree, the comp and class plan that we talked about, that grid, that pay matrix. If over time you don't apply a COLA to that grid, it stagnates. So what might have been the market rate for a position, minimum and maximum, 5 years ago, the market's moving every day, and values of jobs are changing every day. And if you don't keep this grid fresh by growing it every year, every other year, at least by the CPI, you end up well behind the 8 ball. We had that issue with the treasurer collector. You remember we lost the treasurer collector to a neighboring community, a comparable community, but neighboring. She picked up 15 grand day one out the door for the same job. The town accountant is on her last week. She's picking up 15 grand day one for, again, a comparable but very neighboring Pepperell. So when Wayne says this isn't the end of it, there is going to be a comeuppance about what do we want to be? Do we want to be that feeder system for other communities? Or do we want to invest in people, invest in their training, and retain them? Not saying one's better than the other, but it's a policy decision. Yes.
Although, using Lori as a perfect example, she did get offered considerably more money. However, she was offered a position that's also potentially going to grow.
Correct.
Where in Townsend, she's always going to be just an accountant. So a pay raise does not mean necessarily that you're going to keep those people.
No, there's
No.
no guarantee.
No.
But, I mean,
Just to say.
all I have ever done since I graduated from college was public service, public administration. I like the work, but make no bones about it, I do this because I love my family.
Yeah.
Right? So money matters. At the end of the day, I mean, you don't get a nickel. I don't know why you guys do this stuff.
I don't
either.
either. I don't either, because believe me, I could fit in a nice little consulting job or something, and no.
Right,
I-
so while, yes, there was that carrot out there that she may see a finance
That's right.
director position eventually, the fact is, it's,
Guaranteed 5 years, that's not too eventual.
there's no guarantees.
No.
A new board of
but it's
selectmen comes
pretty
in?
assured.
Eh,
If
You know what?
If I'm her, I wouldn't say that.
I'm
But still,
like,
it's 15 grand, day one.
the thing is this,
an
they,
additional 5.
people make their own decisions based on their personal situation. And if their family and their circumstances can leads them to another opportunity, then good luck to them. That's wonderful.
Oh,
You know, but what are we doing to make sure that we're doing what we can to not only ask them to stay, because that's their decision, but to tell them that we value them as employees.
Yeah.
Because feeling valued goes a lot longer with an employee than a paycheck. A pay increase within a month, it's like nothing happened. It's like nothing happened because you start to get used to that. And how we treat our employees, the willingness to talk about that, the willingness to go over their job descriptions, to review the matrix, those are all things that say we care about the whole of your job. And we care that we're compensating you fairly. So it goes beyond budget at some point. So I'm convinced that needs to happen. I was convinced when we did that, and I will remain convinced, because we did talk about all the different sides of it.
And to that point, and I'll use the paramedics as another great examples, we're paying we got a grant for it, but it's $15,000 we're investing in their training to retain them and not let them go someplace else to go out another town. Hey, you come work for Westford and we're gonna pay for your paramedic training. We stopped that blocked it. It wasn't a pay raise necessarily, but it was a training, so we've challenged each department to do that. So if the treasurer collector position, if that position, once we review the job description, or where do they want to be in 5 years, I want this, and this for training, and if I do that, then I get a pay raise, then fantastic, we retain that employee, and we showed some respect or retention to keep them. We traditionally haven't really done that, and that's something that needs to change. So I look at this as the first step in doing that,
Agreed.
moving forward.
Want to go back to board?
Yep.
We haven't really gone over, since Roger's here, we haven't gone over that budget at all.
No, and I know that none of his commissioners are able to be here today, right?
Well, I have one Ray's here with me.
Oh, jeez, okay. I don't have my glasses on, Ray, sorry.
And hopefully John should show up in a little bit, but I'm not sure.
Oh, well, then we can wait and see if John comes.
Yeah, he
All right.
had something else this morning.
Okay, that's
He's supposed to
fine.
be here at 10, so. Coming on that. Okay, so we hit assessors. Next board or commission isn't going to appear until you get down to conservation, which is on page 45, beginning at line 176. And this Also, we'll show the 4.5% in the percentage increase for those two positions. 4.6 is a rounding. That doesn't appear in the version that's currently at play on my desk because, as I mentioned, that would have been a COLA and a step, a 2% COLA, 2.5% step. It's now showing just as a step, 2.5%. Again, with no guarantee that that ever makes it into an employee's pocket. That's all subject to negotiation by the board. Everything else you see in that budget is as was directed by the Conservation Commission.
Any questions on that?
Conservation Commission?
Ending on line 36. Okay, planning board?
Planning board. And again, this is as was voted by the planning board. Again, the 4.5 will reappear, at least at this point, as a 2.5.
And there's a professional services line that looks like it's gone up significantly, though the dollar amount isn't huge.
Gone up $1,400, but as a percentage, it's 1,400%. One of the reasons I don't like using the percentage columns,
Yeah.
because
It could be
they really jump up.
$3,
Right.
but if it was 0 before, it's a 100% increase, so.
And what they're looking at that for is they've been, the requirement to pay for certain advertisements in advance of public hearings and the like. They were not budgeting for that in a way that was able to let them make the year. ZBA, that is a portion of the planning administrator's hours. She puts in a couple of hours to support the ZBA. Next board or commission you're going to get to is not going to appear until TIMA,
Page?
which is page 51. Are we working off the same document, Sue? Is it 51 for you?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so you're seeing line 485. Is everybody seeing line 485 in the numbers? So you see the director, Shirley Coit serves as the director for, last year was the first time that I actually recommended putting in a stipend for Shirley. So this year it would be there as well. That's that $2,000 figure, grown to $2,186 big dollars. That again is 4.5%, so it'll be a little less than that on the current version. Also, a couple years ago, under communications, a mobile phone was funded for the first time. Prior to that, Shirley had been utilizing her own cell phone. So a couple years ago, budgeted for a town emergency management phone that Shirley carries with her. I know that there was some discussion recently, Sue, I think, right, about maybe doing something additional with communication. for
Yeah, I
team
actually
members.
asked Carolyn to reach out to Kim and Shirley to see if there were any other. I know, Kim, when you ran into you were working on the fire.
Yes.
One of the first things I remember you saying was that you could have used like 5 even burner cell phones.
Yes.
You know, because of the need to be able to communicate with the other organizations.
Yes. Do you want me to give you other details? It surely is away until the end of the month,
Okay.
but I did talk to her over the phone, and there are a few things that could be good immediate needs, and she did try to get information on what it would be for 2 extra phones incrementally, right? Don't have to get everything at once, so that in the event there's a situation, she has her phone and people volunteering can have a dedicated incoming and outgoing line for volunteers to use. because what was happening, so people were calling in, and then people had to make calls out to follow up, and so it was very difficult, and there was no official sort of phone line. So Father Jeremy set one up, and then volunteers were using their own phones. And at one point, my data plan, and so then Father Jeremy got us access to his internet. And they don't have a portable printer, so Father Jeremy found us a portable printer. So some things like that would be really helpful. And in talking to her, it was, I can actually look it up pretty quickly. It was a small amount of budget. And she did say that she had some leftover, money that could be used for some of the supplies. But basic sort of immediate need things were 2 cell phones, again, to get incrementally to where they would need to be.
But we wouldn't want to have to, I mean, would you get just a burner phone?
No, you can get a track phone in 5
Yeah, that's what I'm
minutes.
saying.
Yeah, something like that,
Yeah.
or sometimes depending on the plan, and that's what we were trying to find out was what her plan allowed, because some plans allow you an additional phone for like $5, which is very nominal to have that.
But I wouldn't want to pay for it all year. It's like,
Well, that goes to,
that's
that
what I'm
goes,
saying, a track phone.
either a track phone, but that
Yeah.
goes to
In
I
the
think a
track.
greater discussion when we're trying to share services. Does the town have a cell phone plan, if you will, for employees that need to have?
Yes.
Right.
So what would it cost to add a line? Is it $5?
I don't know what the town plan is, but on my plan, so I have a bank of phones for my company, and I can add a phone for $5 a month
Right.
under the same plan. So that's pretty reasonable to
Yeah.
have an
Yeah.
additional
Yeah.
phone
Yeah, I'd like to
and
look
have
at-
that sort of ease of use.
So who administers our cell phone plan?
Right now, it's
Under
changing.
Lori.
What's that?
It's under Lori right now.
Yeah, it's under Lori right now, but it's changing. You've got, the name's going to escape me, the public safety. There's a move through Chief Boynton right now. There's a, yeah.
Oh, the FirstNet?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it's a conversation for a different day.
Yeah, well, there's
It's a
a,
big conversation.
there's a discussion happening right now about whether or not there's a more public safety specific network that they should be using. I know little more than that right now, but right now it's all being
I
managed
don't
through the
want to
accountant's
jump from
office.
here to way out there. I just want them to have, even a box of track phones
Yeah.
that you can hand out.
I mean, you had a good pressure test last month.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Those emergencies don't happen that often. So
That's my point.
Technology also is, irrelevant a year or two later. So do you really want to be buying like phones and printers and having them sit? Are they going to still work on the next emergency? Is there a way to fund it so that you can get access to those funds when the event occurs? It's my question.
But see, that's just it. I mean, if we use this latest situation as an example, then you would be using the one phone to be able to say, okay, let's go get some more phones. I mean, we're
You
dealing
can
with
have an action
people.
plan, yeah, somebody runs to Walmart and actually buys them.
Yeah,
Having
but if it's in
access
the
to-
middle of the night,
Yeah, might not.
you can't be, Mr. Mike stayed open for us during the fire, after hours, so that we could get some basic food to these folks. And the pizza places were great.
I mean, we're not
so-
talking a ridiculous amount of money here, so I
No,
think,
$3,600.
yeah, but I
total.
think, number one, if there still are available funds, it would be good to purchase a printer or something if you need it,
Right.
But, and I don't expect that it would have to be a very expensive one. They're going for almost nothing today.
Yeah, it was like $149.
Yeah, that's, I mean,
Everything was really inexpensive. The one thing that they have is their computer, Basim said, is not reliable.
well, there might be,
So there might be a computer around that they
exactly,
could use.
exactly. So that's what I kind of was hoping that you and Shirley could work together to try to identify those things. And why don't you just pass those on to Jim?
Yeah, I can.
Does that sound all right?
Yeah, that's exactly what it
Yeah,
is.
it's very minimal amount to be
I would
very
expect
operational.
that.
And things that TEMA can use during monthly meetings for exercises and practicing some of these things
Yep.
as well. How to hook up the printer, how to use the phone, all of that.
Okay, so can you get back to Jim?
I'll send it to him right now.
Okay.
All right. We're then going to see cemetery and parks on page 54, 623. John's not here yet, so we should wait a little bit.
Yeah,
come back
let's
to it.
just slip to the next one.
Next is the same page at the very bottom, beginning on 648, Townsend Housing Authority.
48.
So this is the original request that came in from the Housing Authority. It's
Okay,
changed a little bit
we're
since.
off on the page.
No,
54.
Oh, I thought you said 48 just now.
No, 648 is the line.
Oh,
648 is the line,
648, thank you.
So this is a new budget this year. The Housing Authority has functioned for perhaps forever, I don't know.
Since 87.
Yeah, as far back as I could see anyway, without a budget that was specific for them. So this request came in, it's looking for some support staff assistance and professional services, training, and some supplies and some mileage. So a relatively modest request.
But what about the 17 hours?
Right. This
I think that's
this version-
heavy.
Right. Yeah, this version is already,
Okay.
we've already discussed a more recent iteration.
Okay,
This-
what is that?
Right now, it's 5 hours. After our last meeting, and Jazz, you were here, I believe we had the discussion about what is, what's a reasonable place to be on average.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the last version that I put before you folks was 5 hours of land use time, and amending the land use coordinator's job description to specify support for the housing authority. The very bottom of the page, line 651, $35,000 request was coming in for professional services. You'll notice in the town administrator column that's been zeroed out, and that's because it'll reappear as a standalone warrant article at the town meeting, seeking $35,000 in funding for professional services for a project that Chaz and Lori and now Kevin, I guess, is what we're hoping, right, would be able to speak to.
So if, going back up to the position.
Yes.
5 hours of the land use coordinator time, does that bring that line to zero?
No.
Or
no.
are you going to allocate that?
Allocated over here so
Okay.
it can be seen. The request from the Housing Authority was actually to see a budget with some support, so they had
Okay,
some sense of.
okay, so
and
you'll
what's-
reflect the amount in
Yeah,
there.
it does on the one that's on my screen. What's still kind of at play is whether or not it should be 5 hours of admin support at the admin rate, with the job description saying that the land use coordinator has a responsibility to supply support as well. So you don't want the land use coordinator at that rate of pay doing agendas and minutes and those types of things that could be handled at a lesser hourly rate. But you do want that land use coordinator to be able to provide technical support on the bigger, more professional level type of activities. So it may be that this line is admin support truly and not land use coordinator, and shows at a lesser dollar amount, but a note in the land use coordinator line stating that a portion of that salary will be going to support the DHA as well.
Okay.
I'm not clear on that, because there are housing production plans that have to be done. We have sections that we're helping out with the master plan as well. Those all need to be coordinated, which is much more than just doing agenda and minutes as well.
Understood. Yeah, that's why I'm saying, ideally, I think it should be both. It should be a dedicated number of hours for admin support budgeted
Okay.
for the truly admin work.
Okay.
And then the job description for the land use coordinator changed to say provides technical support to the housing authority. So
Okay.
that position exists in total, and a portion of that position is required to do the technical work that's required of the
Good,
housing
so
authority.
GIS services.
Right, so you get
and all of
both.
that.
You get
Okay.
the high-level stuff up in this position, and then you get dedicated admin down in this position.
I'm good. I'm good.
In the end, by law, whoever takes the minutes for the meeting, the clerk, should be paid. It won't go into that. All right, is that?
To a board member? No.
Okay,
No.
all right.
No, I mean, we're with the exception, I believe, of the water commissioners who receive $1 each for some, I don't know why, it just said Benaway, I guess, no board or commission gets paid.
No.
So the
I'm-
clerk of the board would not get a pay for taking minutes.
But they can.
They can, but would not under this rule.
Okay, that's all I
Now,
want.
this would be, ideally, we'd be looking at existing staff that are working, you know, 20, 25 hours to pick up an extra couple of hours.
An overall cover like administrative work.
Right.
You know, then,
No, this would be a non-board member body.
okay.
And can I add too, Jim, if you don't mind, in the past, it's all been volunteer by whoever was doing the land use position, or, you know, a lot of that was very much volunteer. If they had the time, they would do it. If they didn't have the time, then it was up to the elected officials or the appointed officials. And when we're doing the amount of work that we're going to be doing for the next year, we're not able to do the administrative stuff to be able to take care of the board.
I understand that.
Yeah.
I just, sometimes, particularly in new budgets, money gets diverted off to the side and you end up with not enough to accomplish your greater goal.
Okay.
And that's what I was looking for.
Thank you.
So moving on to the very next page, but staying in Housing Authority, there's training, supplies, and mileage. And those are things that, those expenses have existed historically, but they've been being paid out of pocket without reimbursement by members. So this is an attempt to start showing, to Wayne's point, you know, value and appreciation for people that are doing the work, volunteering to be away from their families to benefit the community, and spending money out of their own pockets that, you know, that they shouldn't have to. So this is going to be an attempt to start reflecting, here's a couple of bucks in the budget to reimburse you for your mileage to having gone to that training, or for the $50 fee to, you know, to go to the training that you went to. Everybody follow that? All right, next we get Board of Health, very same page, 2 lines down, beginning on 660. Again, this shows a COLA and a step in the note. Same thing, the version that's currently in play just shows step, all subject to negotiation, still in agreement by the board. Everything else comes in as was requested by the Board of Health, including the very next section, which is Neshoba Associated Board of Health, the nursing contract, and their assessment to us for being, I should change that abbreviation. Should not say monitor asses.
Assessment.
And then we get to landfill engineering. This is the requirement for the capped and closed landfill to be monitored on a regular basis. So there are wells down there that, yes?
Sorry.
No, please.
I thought last year that they said that they would possibly be closing it this year.
It's-
That they would end landfill engineering.
That might have been the thought. It's going down. Well, no, it's going down by
Yeah,
$1,000
it's
bucks. So
gone
the
down.
frequency of the testing has gone down, but no, we're still required to do it.
It's not going anywhere.
What's that?
That's not going anywhere.
No, not likely. Right, and then you get to COA. Do we have Council on Aging here with us today? Negative.
Kind of.
do want
Yeah.
Dan.
Oh, jeez, sorry.
Yeah, we haven't met with them formally
Nope. not
yet.
Okay.
But I do have a question
Yes.
that maybe you could look into
Yeah.
prior to next week. I'm seeing a copier and printer and,
Chairs and filing cabinets.
yeah, and I guess I'm wondering, how do we handle things like copy machines on a townwide basis? Because first of all, it makes it difficult from a department to department perspective. You know, everybody's looking at what our needs are.
Right.
And one year you're gonna have something like that in there, and then for another 3 or 4 years, you're not gonna have that in there. So it's really It's not capital because it's not over $10,000, obviously, but it still could be looked at as consolidated
Yeah. What-
need for the town.
What you'll see in the updated version is that under my recommended column, that $9,500 is not in the operating budget, but it would appear as a warrant article. Now, under the town's capital plan, anything $10,000 or greater, anything, so a thing at 10,000 or greater is required to go through the capital plan. This is a grouping of things that total less than 10,000, so it's kind of in this no man's land. What we do know, though, is that it won't be recurring every year, so it doesn't belong in the operating budget because it will artificially inflate the budget in a year, and then it creates trouble for tracking purposes. So this will appear as a standalone warrant article at town meeting, asking, Council on Aging seeks approval to fund the following $9,500 for these things. But to the bigger point of the copy machine, some discussion has been had about the fact that we have this copier out behind you here that is still relatively new and very effective and efficient. It's a nice machine. It doesn't have color copying capability. So it may be that machine makes its way to the COA and the new either purchase or lease, depending on what makes the best economic sense, ends up here for the town hall with color copying capability. So in terms of sharing the technology in a way that is going to have the biggest bang for the buck.
And I mean, because ink is extremely expensive, I'd want to be careful about the uses of a color printer, but I know that when we've duplicated information at times, it's very difficult to distinguish, to be able to say, look for the red on the sheet. When we're going over budgets and stuff like that, there are times that having a color printer might benefit us, but certainly not, like I said, it's expensive to start that. But I'm looking at it more from a townwide basis, on a townwide basis, instead of people putting those things into their individual budgets, to be able to say who has a need for a new printer or copy machine, and look at it holistically from the standpoint of where should things move, or if you have higher usage and it would be great for them to have that over there, then
Personally, I think it falls under IT.
I think so too. It's IT equipment.
They're all wireless now.
Right, they're not copiers
They're
anymore.
not copiers anymore. They're fax scanners, the whole 9 yards. So, and what I asked a couple to work for is the leasing not only gets you the machine, but it also covers the ink and the other parts of it. So it needs to be looked at as a whole, I think.
Yep.
Everything.
Some of the lease prints do.
Yeah.
That's pretty well worth it if that's what it
And
is.
the other piece of that is actually providing codes for usage. Right now, there's no codes.
Right.
You can walk in and you can burn 300 pages and no one knows who you were or why you did it.
And it also provides security because you're not, God forbid, you're copying a confidential document.
Right.
I can go onto that machine and say, okay, well, at 9:55, James Kreidler copied a document.
Right?
And I have proof of what it was, so not to say that you did anything.
No. Well,
Just as
I'll have been busy monitoring. No. Excellent.
Andrea?
I got confused. Does the Council on Aging want a little printer like my desktop printer?
No.
They want a printer like this.
Printer, copier, scanner.
They do a lot of
Okay.
printing.
Then the other thing, and I agree with you, just belong in the operating budget. But if I have a contract for maintenance for 7 years or 5 years or whatever, on my copier, where is that?
In the respective department, so you'll have, under professional services, you'll have your
Oh, it'd be under professional
your copier, printer, maintenance contracts.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so that was one of the things, and I'm glad we're moving that out for an article, because that just makes from year to year, difficult to compare. The other question I have, but it's not, I don't know if you'd be able to answer it for now. I remember looking at expended reports last year around, I don't know, halfway through the year. And I remember thinking, why does it look like they've spent everything halfway through the year for, and I asked Karen, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but she has other sources of income. Where are those reflected in our paperwork?
They're not reflected in the budget for Council on Aging, for the library, you know, I'm trying to think who else.
Rec.
Yeah, rec.
Well, that's a revolving account. Are those revolving accounts as well?
No. No, those are like friends of accounts, or she has a formula grant she gets.
That's
from the
what I'm
state.
thinking, it's a formula grant.
Yeah, the endowment in the library.
Okay, so it's important to recognize that for library and council on aging, there's other incomes that they get,
And it's a good point.
that
'Cause
get applied to their budgets.
at the last meeting, you had asked me, somebody asked me, Joe, I think, maybe even, asked me to include a line that said that rec is being supported, you know, by the Recreation Revolving Fund, so that the position that you see there is being funded in the budget, but there's funding coming from the revolving. And what's not shown in rec are all of the summer workers. Well, they must be getting paid, why aren't they showing here? That's because the revolving fund supports them separately. So maybe with the library and the Council on Aging, having a note in the notes that says, you know, the budget is also able to be supplemented by boom, boom, boom.
Or is supplemented by.
But I don't think every year it's a guaranteed.
No,
I think
it's
available
not.
to them to ask.
Right, but, I mean,
We can ask them how they think it's most accurate to write it.
yeah, because I think it needs to be reflected somewhere where people recognize that, you know, we're not, the town in the operating budget isn't the sole support for those departments as well.
Right.
Okay? And it's important to recognize what portion of it is coming from the town operating budget versus what's coming from other sources.
Yeah, excellent.
Andrea?
In the town report, usually the
Yeah.
different departments do that. I was wondering, on Council on Aging, let's go to the general fund then? If it doesn't go to a revolving fund for their use, it must go into the general fund.
The formula grant comes in through the general fund. It's a state grant. The Friends stuff does not. Friends
Oh,
stuff-
no, I
But
know
that's
that.
not, that's separate though. That, I wouldn't
But
even deal with friends.
The other thing is that it might be good when if you're gonna lay this out, maybe you should lay it out as a separate issue, so that people know, for years, the different incomes that came into the fire department went into the general fund. They don't now.
Right.
Now they go into revolving funds.
Right.
Maybe it would help people grasp government better.
I think
That's a
you're
good
right.
point.
I think
Yeah.
you're right, Andrea. And I think that's kind of where I was coming from there.
Yes, I thought so too.
Because I just remember that happening last year. At one point, I looked at the expended amounts and I said, Karen, and she said, well, that's because I don't know which one it was first, you know, but she used the income from one, and then for the second half, used the income from the other.
Right.
You know, so it looked like, I think it looked like she wasn't spending anything. It looked like she wasn't spending anything from our budget. But in fact, she was spending, but it was from the grants that they get. So, yeah.
That's actually an interesting, so what you all don't have, that I referenced earlier, is some of the other parts, but there's a revenue projection page that shows property tax, state aid, local receipts, enterprise funds, other available funds. There's detail that follows that shows what all of those things are in a more expanded version, like excise tax and meals tax and the like. We could actually add that additional section that says there are also these other outside or other than budgetary funds that go to support the following.
Right, and one of the things that I had asked for the other day, and hopefully we'll have for the next meeting, is,
That was a subtle reminder for me, if you guys didn't,
Yes.
if you guys didn't pick that up.
not so
I
subtle,
was just gonna say, it's not at all.
not subtle at all. I have to have some fun in this unpaid job.
Yeah, when do we get that part of that?
But we skipped it. Is an accounting, a full accounting of how much do we have in these revolving funds on a year-to-year basis? I just want to know, starting July 1, how much money is in an account?
Well, you know, one
On-
thing,
on a-
at
on a
the end of the
trended
year, when they
basis.
close out the books,
One sec.
I'm
Okay,
sorry.
so who can give departments that information? That's my question, because like for cemetery and parks, it's really important that we
Because
get,
you guys get funding too.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's really important that we have those numbers at least on a quarterly basis.
Okay, so we're all saying the same thing.
Yeah, I mean,
and that
yeah,
goes-
so,
that goes for the
yeah,
schools
so
as
that's, so who really do
Yeah.
we? I'm not trying to put anybody
We
on
can-
the spot
We
here.
can get that from the accountant's office, okay?
So-
It's just that nobody, I don't think nobody's, I don't think that none of us have asked for that as a regular report before, or as part of the budget.
Quarterly updates on revolvings.
Yeah, I mean, I know, but there's been a lot of, that's why I don't want to put anybody on the spot, because I know there's been a lot going on downstairs.
Yeah.
But I, periodically have said, yeah, I gotta, I really have to, especially when we start getting in more towards the end of the fiscal year, you really want to know what you've got available.
Exactly.
Because we're going into a really busy time of cleanup and things like that, so
So that's interesting too, because if you're talking about non-operating budget accounts, I like to look at the expended balances. You get halfway through the year, where is everybody in terms of what percentage of each of the things they asked for last year have they spent? And that's an interesting one, because I don't think that's in those expended.
That's
all operating budget.
That's all off view, yeah.
Yeah.
at the end of the year, the close of the fiscal year, then that report, the ending balance in every department, and all the trust funds and everything else is there.
Yeah, but I
But it
think,
comes at such an erratic time. Sometimes
Yes.
you can get it in August, and sometimes you gotta wait until
and
December,
I'm not waiting for the books to close, I don't mean that, but just to be able to see where am I at on a regular
I
basis.
mean, we're at the point now where the expenditure reports year-to-date, each month, go up online. So
Yeah, is
why-
everybody
why-
aware of that?
Why
This is-
quarterly can't we do, balances and revolving accounts?
Yeah, she was able to get me something finally.
Sure. There you go.
But there
But I mean-
is in the accountant's budget section, the accountant's section, if you go to town accountant department, there's expenditure reports are listed online,
yeah,
and I
for the,
think they're all there.
Yeah.
I think they're all
Mark-
posted.
Everybody gets their own account.
Yeah, but she lists,
Every month.
This is the full-
town budget year-to-date each month goes up online.
Oh,
So you can see what's been expended to
It's-
date.
Well, I get the whole.
Yeah, what you get is actually.
I know that you can request more than just your department.
Right, it's what the FinCom gets, okay? And I had asked if that could be posted, because it's easier for me than for her to have to remember to email it, Okay, yes.
We had a question at the FinCom meeting the other night about the assistant program coordinator at the Council on Aging for 7 hours. I mean,
Yeah, we're gonna have to talk about that when they come
Yeah, they
to the
haven't come
next
in yet,
meeting,
so- Yeah, that'll be Tuesday.
okay?
Next Tuesday.
Yeah, not this coming.
Not this coming Tuesday, week from Tuesday.
You can go if you want.
We don't have a meeting this coming Tuesday.
And just for sake of time, I do have to leave at 11.
Yeah, I've got a hard stop at 11 as well. Have you heard from John?
I have not.
Okay, well, we'll try to go through the other stuff.
All right, the next is, the very next page, 56, library.
We got veterans too.
I think 56.
Veterans wasn't a board or commission, so it's
That's
not
right,
counted.
okay, all right.
Library came in two budgets. One was the total budget with no wage increase being contemplated for the director, and then subsequent to that, an email with the requested salary adjustment for the director. A little bit of history on that. When we talked earlier about position descriptions, job descriptions, and the fact that over the course of time they may change in terms of your responsibility, the elected library commissioners have authority under the law to contract with the library director. So whereas all other contracts in town come through the select board, statutorily there is a carve-out that allows the library commissioners or the trustees to contract with the library director. They hadn't ever done that until about 2 years ago. So the second piece of that is they have also come to understand that based on the policies in town that we talked about, the matrix or that salary plan only covers employees that are not otherwise in a union or in a personal services contract. So whereas the director's position had been pegged into that salary scale before it was contracted, now that it is contracted, the trustees have the ability to negotiate what they think is a fair salary for that position. So this year you will note that the request is coming in from what was $63,642 in the current fiscal year to $72,910 for next fiscal year.
So that's a bump up because of a change in,
It's based on a combination of things. One is a change in the, hey John, the level of responsibility that they believe the position now has responsibility for. You can't have responsibility for responsibilities. Now has under
is
it.
responsible for.
Thank you. And additionally, what they think is fair. So what they've done is they've done an analysis of what they deem comparable libraries, which is different than comparable communities, because there could be a group of communities that are deemed on average to be comparable to us based on equalized property value, tax rate, income per capita, those types of things. But it may be that in that mix, some of those communities don't have a fully functional library the way we do. It could be something that is just very part-time, open 2 days a week. So what they've done is gone beyond that very generalized series of comparable communities and looked for specifically comparable libraries in terms of the number of books that they put out, the number of visits, the level of programming. And they've determined that based on their analysis and their judgment that that figure is what is an appropriate figure to pay the director for this library. They recognize going in that that's significant. They recognize that they have to go to the FinCom, the Select Board, and ultimately town meeting. But they are prepared based on the data and what they believe is fair to make that argument. This is not unlike the discussion we had about the firefighters and the medics a little bit ago. It's not unlike a discussion we're going to have. John's with us now. We'll speak about the superintendent's position in cemetery and parks. There are a couple of other positions in here that we've had discussions about over the last year that should have the job descriptions looked at. They're not contemplated in this budget yet, but to Wayne's point, this isn't the end.
No.
This is the beginning of what's going to be an updating of the positions based on today's level of responsibilities that may be different than the original job description and today's market considerations.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody from the library is here, but just on personal experience, since their proximity to Hawthorne Brook, they are a glorified daycare when school gets out. They have over, I can't remember the number she gave, but it was probably at least 50 kids per day that go there after school while their parents are working to come in. So I have no issue with the bump in the responsibility on that. So
They also got an employee to take care of that.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was last year.
right, and that's much needed, and the supervision that was added to that is reflected.
It's really neat if folks haven't gone there lately, I don't know who helped them do it. I remember them telling me, but I don't. There's a section that's like for the young teens, and it's really neat because it caters to the kinds of things that they're dealing with and the kinds of books and the kinds of things that they're looking for online. It's really nice. It's very nice. It's carving out that particular segment of the population and their library needs. It's exciting.
And there is busing from the high school to the library every day as well, so.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know if people realize this or not, but when we talk about the high school, they've got a beautiful library media center.
All the schools have nice libraries.
And the problem is that it's not staffed after school. I suggested at one time that some folks that are retired might actually enjoy doing a volunteer thing at the high school so that library could be open, say from 2 to 5 or 2 to 4 whenever the late buses come. And it seems a shame, but there's nobody to staff that. The same thing at the middle school. There's nobody to staff it. And I know there's a lot of sharing among all of the libraries as well, that's great. Okay, so if you need something, you can get it at one of the other libraries, and they're all part of the MARS system as well. So that's great. But
in that regard, the Townsend Library is a regional library, not just because of MARS, but because of what it is. I mean, people come from further than you can imagine for the program offerings at the library. It is really a regional magnet. It's a good thing.
there's a lot of homeschooled.
Sure.
There's a lot of homeschooled parents that use that library on a regular basis as well, to help them with, teaching their children. So if you haven't gone over and gotten a tour, it's very, very impressive. So we look forward to them coming.
One
Yes.
thing about the salaries again. I still think a 14.5% raise is going to be a tough sell on town meeting floor.
Well, it's their, it's their board, they've looked at it, like Jim said, they've got the data to back it up, and that's what town meeting's about.
Just, somebody could make a motion to reduce that.
Right, because we went over it Thursday nights, and we couldn't.
Well, in fairness to the library trustees, they haven't come in and had their meeting with us, okay? So I'd like to just hold off on that. I mean, obviously, they're gonna know what kind of questions we have, and they probably anticipated more than we've even come up with. So I'd like to just hold off to talk about more detail around that, okay?
And Madam Chair, I'm going to call upon Moderator Barrett for a minute. Put your moderator hat on. In Townsend Town Meeting, if the budget is on the floor and somebody calls for a hold on the library budget, is town meeting able in the town of Townsend to reduce the library direct?
Their funding to pay one person more than the other. If the town meeting did vote to reduce the director's salary and the library trustees, I believe, and I can't speak as town council, obviously, I think that the library trustees could arrange it, that they pay that person that additional salary, but they certainly would fly against the will of the
I guess
town.
the thing that comes to mind is their
I was
contract.
going to say that it becomes complicated more by the fact that
I mean,
the trustees enter into a contract with that employee for that amount. Obviously, it's subject to appropriation,
Exactly.
but you do have that other wrinkle to
That's,
it.
I think, and again, I'm not trying to speak as town council, but I think that's a misconception that's, I think, frequently prevalent at town meeting, that we've negotiated this contract, you have to approve it.
Not until
That's not the case.
Not until it's
Town
appropriate.
meeting can say, no, we don't approve that amount of money, and the negotiating parties have to go back to negotiating. So,
The other further wrinkle of that, though, is once you've appropriated at town meeting for the first year of a multi-year
oh,
contract,
right.
you bought the other years.
Right. I didn't get into that, but you're right, Jim. If you approve a contract for a 3-year period, that's done. You can't revisit it the next year of the 3-year contract and say, we want to reduce it. Once you approve it, that's, you're stuck with it, basically. Or, no, I shouldn't say stuck with it, but that's, you're committed to it. So,
What'd you have, Andrew?
So, if that's true on all the, I mean, I didn't mean it that way, that's true.
If John's right.
Yeah.
I very rarely am.
I'm sorry. Maybe then at the budget in the first year of the 3-year contract, the entire salary raise for each year should be in there. For people to know the total of what they're buying with their one vote.
Some communities actually will have a special standalone article saying we have the following 5 collective bargaining agreements that we're putting before the town meeting for authorization, for appropriation, for pick your word. And they are, firefighters 3, 3, 3 over the next 3 years, police 3, 2, 4, or whatever.
Right.
And then there is full transparency as to what those out years are that you're buying.
Yeah.
Because it's also a dirty little trick that sometimes happens is you'll do a 0, 5, 5, and, oh yeah, this
there's no raise.
contract, there's no
Yeah.
raise. And then you bought the 2 5s on the tail end.
yeah.
But what you're voting on is not the contract, you're voting on
Funding it.
the funding,
Oh, of course.
okay? So
Right.
that's the
Right,
key
the town
here.
town meeting can't play around with the terms of the contract. The only
Right.
call is on the money, basically.
So, Cemetery and Parks.
Ah,
So we're gonna go back a couple pages.
yeah. And sorry I'm late, because I had other obligations.
Okay.
You're gonna go to page 54, and beginning on line 623. As I said earlier, when we were picking on Roger, this is an example of what Wayne was saying is not the end of the story, it's just the beginning, which is looking at positions, determining whether or not their position descriptions are still reflective of their responsibility. If they're not, what does that mean? So I won't speak for the Cemetery and Parks Commissioners, except to say that my understanding is that they've reviewed that with their superintendent. They believe that the position is more responsible than had previously been being compensated for, and therefore this is the recommendation going forward. So with that, I guess I turn to you, John, and this additional information you think is important.
Well, I think you pretty much sum it up, and Ray, our chairman, is here too, Ray Boyce, we're kind of dealing with sort of a new situation here. Of course, our clerk, Pam Heyman, also is here, and already know Roger. I'm sorry, I'm not introducing everybody. Is Tubby here? No. All right.
The biggest group.
But I have, and I think I have to confess that having the contract is a little bit different thing, just to witness the discussion we just had. I can't recall if we had the information as far as what the other years of the contract would be. We probably did, but I can't recall them right now. But I think, Roger has done a great job running the department, and I think he runs it very efficiently. And so I think it's certainly well worth the funds that we're requesting the town to provide for his and the department services. I think
John, what have you changed, though? Haven't you changed the job description too? I thought that...
Maybe officially we've changed the job description, but I think it's always been a case of, as far as Roger, as being the superintendent and, I'd have to say, the master of all trades, really, and I don't want to make him blush, but, I mean, he really can deal with situations, I feel, and, work them out in a very practical and efficient way, and I think in the long run save the town money. We have, I think, having some reductions in the scope of our province, if you will, because of the facilities maintenance, the facilities department is taking over some of the things that we used to do. But I think that was something that we were trying to do way back when we didn't used to do those things. And when we had I think the budget crunch really in the early 90s, I think we started taking over more and more of those things. And I think it's kind of writing the course now for us to be more concerned with our true province, which is cemetery and parks. So, I don't know if that answers your question, Sue, but...
Thought there was a change with the job itself, though.
Recognition of on-call, I thought, was
Yeah.
the footnote that I saw.
Maybe, yeah, because, that's right, because now we're going to a salary situation as opposed to an hourly. And-
Tell us what's different.
Well, I think in some respects it'd be fairer to Roger because I think there was a number of occasions, and maybe this isn't proper to say, but where he would be working and he wouldn't get paid, because it'd be, and plus just being on call. I mean, he's basically always on call, so he doesn't really always get, I think, paid for that as other people might. So we think that the salary is better.
Let's talk about cemetery and full disclosure, Roger and I have talked about this like a while ago, and how the whole cemetery thing is changing, how things happen. I think that people think of it as the funeral director is working with, is the intermediary, if you will, always working directly with the cemetery department. My understanding, and from what I've seen with some folks that I know too, is they've had a death in the family, but they're not necessarily going through a funeral situation, a funeral parlor, if you will, okay? So they're tending to go directly to the cemeteries. I see that as a big shift in the kind of responsibility that our cemeteries, not just here, but everywhere, are starting to go through. My own sister dealt directly with the cemetery when she buried her husband, because she had him cremated down in Florida and brought him up here, and the whole thing was planned directly with the cemetery person, and I will add that it was off hours as well. So I'm assuming that I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm assuming that it's to address those kinds of situations in terms of what you would call on-call.
Right, yeah, that's one thing that we had talked about, and Roger has, is taking on more in that area, essentially becoming like a funeral director, because these folks are not using a funeral home, and he's sort of like on call all the time. So that is a shift, and so I didn't think of that earlier, but that's right. That's a major, I think, development in cemetery services.
I mean, I didn't realize it until Roger said it, and then my sister went through it, and I said, oh, that's one of those situations, you know? So I think it's important that people realize that the way that we've done things in the past isn't necessarily the way that the direction's going in now.
That's right, yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Joe.
I just had a question that it was on a different subject, if we were done with that. Just Roger, what do you use the temporary help for?
Those are my seasonal summer guys that help us cut the grass and do funerals and things like that. In the wintertime, do the sidewalks, and they're actually digging today, unfortunately, but
So, explain to me how they can get a step, the temporary help.
Because they're recognized in the comp and class plan. Their rate of pay is recognized in the plan.
Not part of the union contract, but
No.
it's part of the, what we used to call the matrix.
Right.
So are the recreation people.
You know, even the summer folks that come back, those positions, if they're the same people from year to year, they would be eligible for a step.
So then it's more that they're permanent, part-time, or permanent temp.
You could say that.
If they come back, yeah.
Yeah, they're oftentimes the same people. It's not like they're,
Right.
we actually do rely on people that come back. Sometimes they're, college students, some start working for the cemetery department in high school.
They have no right to the position
Right,
from year to
right,
year,
right.
but we hope that they come
Yeah,
back
because
year to year, because we've already trained
sort of
them.
know the ropes, and we try to keep that, I'd almost call it a feeder system, that, they will teach the younger ones, and then, they move on, they get other better jobs and everything, but then, we have, and frequently, at least it's local, right? Local people local young people that are getting some work and some investment in the town, I guess you should say.
Is there a revolving fund with the cemeteries as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is, okay. So that'd be part of the,
They're part of that other spreadsheet.
Well, back to Sue's thing, the recreation, they pay theirs out of the revolving.
Correct. Until 2 years ago, there wasn't a recreation budget at all.
But they get,
Right.
I just wanted you to know, they get a step as well if they return.
Okay, which is paid out of the revolving.
Right.
Right,
Okay.
but like I said, it's not unusual for the temporary help to get a step if they return.
yeah, it's a hard job to get.
It is. It is. To piggyback on one of John's points, the contract does put a weird wrinkle in this, because you'll note that for the first time in the TA recommended column, the number actually goes down from what was recommended by the commissioners. You'll see the commissioners recommended the 61,000. In this version, mine was contemplating a step and a COLA. It's a little bit less than the 61. Now that the current version that is on my computer but not in front of you is down to just the 2.5% step, that 59 is yet again a little lower. The note says per union contract, because right now it would be something that would have to be negotiated. I don't expect there'd be difficulty, because I think you're the select board, you ultimately will make the decision for management side. You're hearing the compelling argument about the change in how things function in real life. But in order to affect it, it does need to go through that process. So this is an example of, even if town meeting votes it, unless and until the union contract is negotiated, approved, and signed, the money sits in the line but doesn't make it to the paycheck.
So I picked a great year to have as my last year, didn't I?
Everything's
All the
open.
contracts are open.
Everything's open.
Oh, great, okay. Any other questions on cemetery and parks?
Going to the maintenance, it's 185%.
$650 increase.
Yeah.
That's why I hate the percentages.
Yeah.
Right.
Is that because they're older?
Yeah, I can speak to all this if it would like me to.
Yeah.
Yeah. We had an increase in our expense account, and John was explaining earlier that we had given up the parking lots that we were plowing to highway. So we're gonna remove that amount of money out of the expense account. And the other one, that's a $350 bump, we're gonna remove that one also.
Oh.
And I took a new 1-ton dump truck with a plow off of the capital plan in preparation of this. Now that we know that highway has incurred the parking lots, we no longer do them, so I'm just taking that all back out.
So your plowing is going to consist of plowing the cemeteries?
Our cemeteries,
Okay.
correct. Yeah, yeah. In the back of the common occasionally, that's, yeah. So that's why we're gonna take that out. Just never made it that far yet.
Thought we were still doing town hall.
Nope.
No, oh, okay.
Highway takes care of all.
We've gone,
Okay.
we've gone, did you call it early 90s? When
Yeah.
they change it? We've gone early 90s.
Okay.
And we're back there now.
Yeah, yeah.
Geez, too bad we couldn't This budget would look a lot different if it was the early 90s.
So this budget has actually changed completely when you back that out. Is that in the new one?
I don't know if Jim has that information.
I don't have that yet. I just made note of it just now, so.
Yeah,
Okay,
we just went over that at our last meeting.
all right.
It hasn't made it as far as Jim's desk yet.
Okay.
But before leaving cemetery and parks, to John's other point, I mean, the level of efficiency that comes out of that outfit is noteworthy. There's a lot that gets done for a very modest budget.
So, full transparency on Roger's position. My understanding, I think you mentioned it, is going from hourly to salary.
That's the proposal that's come back from the commissioners.
Okay, and that salary has a bump to take the place of on-call, if you will, overtime.
On-call and overtime, both,
To
yeah.
recognize his on-call and overtime.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, it's, it actually comes out to $1,469 difference from what's recommended to their request.
All right, I believe we have hit all boards and commissions with 7 minutes to spare.
Not quite, I'm not done
Not
yet.
quite.
Capital plan. Well, we're talking about budget.
God bless you.
Has everybody got everything that they wanted into the capital plan?
We're meeting Monday night.
I just got a note.
Capital is meeting Monday night? Just a reminder, that's late. The capital plan was due last week.
60 days.
60 days prior to town meeting. Okay. The other thing I wanted to mention was we started to kind of do things a little differently too. You pulled out the non-operating revenues. Non-operating revenue would be the stabilization,
Free cash.
free cash,
And
so that we
cap
have a full view to all of the items, to all of the money, okay? Which is kind of what led us into the discussion about the revolving funds, okay? So that we have a feel for how much money is out there sitting in all these different accounts. Okay, we may not be able to spend it as part of the operating budget, but at least we have a view to it, okay? Bottom line, Jim, for the one that you have in there, minus the few $100s that Roger was just talking about, where are we?
I'm about 40 grand out of balance right now, with a consideration of the school coming in at a $500,000 increase, with steps, not steps and COLAs, recognizing the 3 full-time firefighter paramedics and the decrease in the per diems, and a few other changes since last week. But I'm roughly around 40 grand out right now.
Okay.
Which on that budget is pretty good. So I expect
Okay,
within
just
the
so
next...
everybody has a feel for a bottom line for the operating budget, that's where we're standing right now. What's our timeline for having everything done so that we can start putting together all of the final packages, if you will? Because at some point, we gotta say, hey, stop. No more changes allowed.
My obligation is to have it to you at your next meeting.
Okay.
So I'll have a balanced budget with the complete book completed by your next meeting.
Does that include the school?
I'm going on
We're
what I've
going
got.
with bottom line for
I
that.
understand that, but you know, I guess my question is, when is the school budget due to us? That they're finalized?
Well, they never have a final.
They approved the budget they were talking about the other night at their committee meeting.
Right, they approved the higher one, just as the cap, without cuts,
Well-
because they can't go up from that. They can always go down.
Practically speaking, they are working on how to reduce their budget to what we said we could afford. Okay? Practically speaking. But that doesn't mean that they're reducing their budget. Their certified budget ends up the same until they see what they get for money. because they can go down, but they can't go up, so they leave it at a high level.
All right, I just want to put it out there.
And they could
So the number
conceivably,
they're asking for is not the number we'll be suggesting on town meeting floor.
and they could conceivably not reduce the budget, but just bring other
Another-
sources of funding to bear, additional E&D or,
And that would be nice. And we didn't get an answer on that either, did we?
The DOR.
DOR?
no, same, they hold the same position that even though the law says,
But did you check back with Sean?
I did.
Yeah?
Well, they-
Oh, I didn't hear
Well, they
back.
contradicted themselves the
Yeah.
other night.
Yeah.
Where they received money back from, I can't remember what school it was.
From the collaborative.
Oh, yeah, the collaborative.
So they were welcome to get that money back, but, you know, then reluctant to say that, you know, well, we're giving you back the money that we owe you.
Right.
So I found that kind of ironic.
Yeah, it's something actually for John too. I don't know if you've ever had occasion to look at the, it's a curious bit of law for excess and deficiency for the school department, so their equivalent of free cash. They can, by law, they can carry from year to year no more than 5% of their operating budget as E&D. Anything that they certify at the end of the year in excess of 5%, they have to do something with, and that's where it gets funky. The law, and it's, I want to say it's Chapter 71, Section 16B, I'll pull it for you, but it says that they have to use it to give back to the communities along the same pro rata share that they set the assessment to reduce the current year's budget. So,
In other words, they gotta give it back to us
So in that
because they
case-
overbilled us.
so in that case, right now, they certified $450,000 over what they can keep, so they have to give it back, which would be about $200,000 to us. They're supposed to give it to us by that piece of the law to reduce this year's budget. But then there's a Code of Mass Regulation that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education goes by that says it's to be used to offset the prospective year.
So they're
So-
taking it out of, they said, oh, that's okay, because we're already taking $1 million out of E&D, so.
For next year.
For next year, out of the 2020 budget. And I said, wait a minute. So instead of, okay, so one day, we decided we're taking $1 million out of E&D and applying it toward the 2020 budget. The next day, they get this letter saying, you over-assess the towns, and therefore you owe Townsend
$200,000.
$200,000. Okay? Oh, okay, well now we're gonna reduce that $1 million by $20,000 that we owe Townsend. We're gonna just apply it to that. So in essence, they're not spending the same $1 million from E&D. It's come down by the overage in their assessment. So it seems like the regulation, I know.
The regulation and law say two
regulation and the
different
law
things. Yeah.
are different.
It's,
I would think
And we're not done with
law
that
would,
yet.
You know, be superior to the code.
And DOR takes the position that this is a DESI issue, and we just go by what DESI says, and they say the CMR is what governs.
just to quote Lee
So-
Corso, it's not so fast, my friends.
Yeah?
Yes, and I thought we talked about maybe bringing that to town council too.
Yeah, I forwarded it off to
Okay,
them.
good, all right. I'm anxious to hear what the answer to that one is, because when you read the law, it's pretty clear. Joe, last thing?
Doing the, COLA versus the step, is there a big difference between giving some people the 2.5% step versus
The
everybody?
biggest
a 2%
difference is there are
raise?
some people that are not eligible for a step increase, so some employees are gonna get an increase under a 2.5 step, and others are not. I'm more inclined to go with a COLA.
Yeah, that's
if
where
I
I was going,
can't
but you
give
said
both.
you budgeted in the step and not the COLA?
And I left that there because it's the bigger of the two, just
Okay.
to show me, again,
The COLA is the
incrementally
bigger of
the
the
worst.
two. The COLA is the bigger of the
No,
two.
no, the step is. The COLA was always being carried at 2%, the steps are
Oh,
at
okay,
2.5%.
all right, so, that's fine. Okay.
And that's all subject to negotiation, with the
Yeah,
exception of those four positions
I know,
anyway.
I know.
John had something?
John,
Real quick,
last one.
Madam Chairman, I just put my moderator cap on again, about the format of the budget.
Yeah.
Did you guys already talk about that?
We talked about needing to
little
talk about
bit.
it.
we're gonna talk about it
'Cause,
some more.
I mean, I think this, laid out as it is, it allows the meeting to be able to look at everything and say, okay, that's what it is, there's the bottom line. I mean, I just recommend we go back to the kind of the format that we had, and no disrespect to Jim and the major work he does, putting it all together in the budget, but at the town meeting, your budget presentation plan and explanation of everything, but when you get down to the nitty gritty, it seemed like last year, people were confused because they were going back and forth from one form to another form, and if we have just a working sheet like this so that people can say, okay, this is what budget is.
Can I do straw poll? How many like this format to work off of at town meeting?
Well, I'll say yes with a caveat.
Okay.
I have two things I want to add to it, is the front page has the headers,
Oh, yeah, we gotta fix the format.
Follow them on each page.
and get rid of the percentages. No, I'm serious.
No, I don't think we should.
No, I think you need to, because people need to recognize
Okay.
that, you know, this is up by 400%, but we're only talking $200.
Okay.
You know, people need to see that.
Okay.
And the only other change would be the line that says TA recommend disappears, and it says BOS and FinCom approved, if there's consensus between the two.
Okay, and are you gonna supply the contract information?
It doesn't exist yet, because all contracts are
All
open,
contracts are open,
and they very likely won't be negotiated
starting
by
July 1.
May.
Kim, quick,
One thing if we could, and I'm happy to help with it, these columns could be shrunk and the font brought up. We're still using this, you may not, same number of
For our
pages.
old eyes?
Yeah, and I'm happy to
That would
help
be
with that
big.
little
That'd be
technical
big.
piece.
Yeah,
if
I've
you
offered
know,
Jim
Wayne
the same
could probably
thing,
do
so.
it, yeah,
okay,
yeah.
I move to adjourn at 11:05.
I'll second that. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.